Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I've got my music historian hat firmly on today, and I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through a deeply fascinating, subversive, and honestly just very loud piece of cultural history. We're going to be exploring 40 years of feminist punk rock. As you'll see through the sources today, this isn't just about the music. It's the story of how marginalized voices fought for their space, absolutely shattered gatekeeping, and completely redefined traditional gender roles with nothing but a guitar in hand and a serious DIY spirit. So let's dive right in.
Now, look at this. You might be thinking this is some classic punk lyric from the 1970s, right? Actually, no. It's from Viv Pateau, a 79-year-old washboard player in an Oxford-based punk band called Hormones. And get this, she picked up her instrument just a year ago. This raw, unapologetic lyric perfectly captures the defiant, totally age-defying energy we're going to be exploring today. Punk literally has no age limit, and that rebellious spirit of women claiming the stage is just as alive today as it was 40 years ago.
So here's our historical syllabus for today. 1. Pioneers of feminist punk. 2. Subverting traditional femininity. 3. The Riot Grrrl movement. 4. Third wave in male allies. 5. 33 essential songs. And 6. The modern D.I.Y. legacy.
To give us a little chronological grounding, this timeline brilliantly illustrates a 4-decade pass the torch kind of journey. We kick things off in 1975 with Patti Smith's incredibly foundational album Horses, move through the raw early UK punk scene of the late 70s, jump right over to the organized American Riot Grrrl movement in the early 1990s, and then track it all the way to modern DIY punk bands like Downtown Boys in the 2010s. It's a really continuous, evolving lineage of rebellion.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, Pioneers of Feminist Punk. To really wrap our heads around what these artists accomplished, we kind of have to set the scene. Veteran punk journalist and musician Vivian Goldman noted something really telling. She said, "Resistance to our existence was an acknowledged fact of life. Women in rock weren't just ignored back then, they were actively resisted." The early rock scene was a massive boys' club, rife with systemic misogyny, where women's technical abilities were constantly questioned and they were relentlessly over-sexualized by the press and industry gatekeepers.
So the real question is, how did these women solve that problem? The 1970s rock industry was an absolute lattice boys' town, as Goldman calls it. Women were mostly expected to be groupies, muses, or at best pop singers. But punk offered a do-it-yourself, or DIY, solution. You didn't need a massive record label, an expensive studio, or permission from some male executive to make punk music. That DIY ethos became the ultimate problem-solving tool. It allowed women to just completely bypass those gatekeepers and carve out their very own creative spaces.
Moving right along to Section 2, Subverting Traditional Femininity.
You know, it wasn't just about the chords they were playing, it was entirely about how they presented themselves. The visual rebellion of feminist punk literally weaponized stage presence and fashion. Rather than conforming to standard magazine beauty advice, a lot of these women deliberately uglified themselves or adopted heavily androgynous looks. They were actively rejecting the traditional male gaze. Later on, artists like Kathleen Hanna would take things even further, reclaiming derogatory words by just writing them directly across their skin in lipstick or thick markers. They were taking back their bodily autonomy and completely shattering the traditional ideas of femininity that society was trying to force onto them.
Think about mainstream rock for a second. It placed musicians way up on this pedestal, requiring years and years of intense technical practice just to pull off massive guitar solos. Punk fundamentally eliminated that pedestal. It put the performer and the audience on completely equal ground. You didn't need 10 years of classical training, you literally just needed 3 chords and something to say. That was absolutely crucial for women, who historically hadn't been encouraged to pick up electric guitars or drumsticks when they were kids.
That brings us to Section 3, the Riot Grrrl movement.
Shifting our timeline forward to the early 1990s, we see a huge cultural explosion, primarily centered in the American Pacific Northwest and Washington, D.C. Neutrally and historically defined, Riot Grrrl was an underground feminist punk movement that seamlessly mashed together third-wave feminism, aggressive punk music, and radical politics. But it wasn't just a sound, right? It was an infrastructure. They demanded safe spaces for women at concerts, famously asking men to move to the back so women could be at the front without fear of harassment. And they communicated all of this through vast independent networks of homemade magazines, which we know as zines.
Now there's a really vital contrast I want you to notice here. As Vivian Goldman points out, the early UK female punks in the 70s were fighting parallel battles in a highly underfunded, fragmented, no woman's land. They were true pioneers, but they were often isolated.
On the flip side, the American Riot Grrrl movement of the 90s was incredibly organized. Because they utilized those grassroots zine networks and generally had better funding, they were able to build a cohesive, interconnected cultural wave that spread like wildfire across the country and eventually the world.
And hey, have you ever wondered about the spelling of Riot Grrrl? Changing the word girl to a literal growl with multiple R's wasn't just a typo, it carried significant academic and cultural weight. It was a very intentional spelling shift designed to reclaim childhood, that time before society started stripping away girls' self-esteem. At the exact same time, it subverted a word that was constantly used to belittle adult women, channeling their justifiable anger straight into empowerment. It was basically a form of linguistic rebellion.
Next up is Section 4, Third Wave and Male Allies.
To really grasp the whole picture, we need to look at the broader political context and the important role of solidarity within the scene itself. The evolution of feminist punk ties directly into the history of third-wave feminism. While earlier waves focused a lot on legal and political rights, the third wave that emerged in the 90s was deeply focused on individual identity, intersectionality, and empowering marginalized voices from all different backgrounds. Riot Grrrl was essentially acting as the musical wing of this movement, giving a really loud, public voice to deeply personal and often taboo struggles.
And in this fight, solidarity absolutely mattered. Why can't I walk down a street free of suggestion? You might actually be surprised to learn that this isn't sung by a woman. This is a lyric from Ian MacKaye, the frontman of the all-male post-hardcore band Fugazi. MacKaye intentionally sang from a woman's perspective to highlight the aggressive, daily objectification of women's bodies out on the street.
The impact of that specific song, Suggestion, was massive. It really became a historical tentpole for male feminism within the punk scene. It was a crucial moment because male allies were actively utilizing their own platforms and their own loud guitars to denounce the patriarchy. That helped solidify anti-sexism as a core tenet within the broader punk community, which ended up inspiring a ton of other male bands to follow suit.
Which leads us straight to Section 5, 33 Essential Songs.
33. That is the pretty daunting number of essential songs the staff at Pitchfork put together to document the history of feminist punk. What makes this list so incredible is that it tracks the raw energy and very clear feminist messaging over a 40-year span, perfectly capturing the fissures and cracks these women made in the towering edifice of rock's boys' club.
If you map it out across the decades, it's like watching a giant, loud puzzle come together. In the 1970s, you have foundational creative forces like Patti Smith, whose highly poetic and aggressive album Horses just broke the mold. Fast forward to the 1990s, and figures like Kathleen Hanna fronting Bikini Kill are driving the Riot Grrrl movement and pushing zine culture right into the mainstream. And looking into the 2010s, bands like Downtown Boys carry the torch, bringing a very modern, intersectional lens to that D.I.Y. legacy. It is a completely continuous thread of rebellion.
And finally, Section 6, the modern D.I.Y. legacy.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, this essential historical record gives today's young bedroom artists a powerful sense of continuity. If you're sitting in your room right now, messing around with a synthesizer or an electric guitar, I want you to know you aren't doing it in a vacuum. You are the direct beneficiary of a long line of D.I.Y. feminist punks who fought tooth and nail for the creative space you occupy right now.
And hey, if you're feeling inspired to start your own band, I've got some very direct, actionable advice sourced straight from punk pioneer Vivian Goldman. First, create a community with complementary skills. Find people who do what you can. Second, even in our digital age, find a way to actually physically be with your creative cohorts. Get in a room together. And third, remember that absolutely nothing beats jamming with your sisters. The music is important, for sure, but the community is everything.
Which brings us to one final thought. We've seen exactly how these women bypassed the gatekeepers, boldly reclaimed their identities, and quite literally changed the landscape of live music forever. So will the raw, unapologetic spirit of the original feminist punks inspire you to build your own creative revolution today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and most importantly, keep making some noise.